Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of Political Power Ranker. Chris Berg here, Director of Political Coverage for Nexstar Media Group, and Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling Director Extraordinaire, the man, the mystery, the the attributes I can't even imagine saying anymore live on television or taped on television. I can't do it anymore because I might get in trouble. Spence, glad to have you here again. Love seeing you.
Chris, flattery doesn't work on everyone, but it does on me. Good to see you as well.
All right, we don't want to waste any more time. We got a lot to talk about today. First one up, North Carolina. North Carolina District 1, brand new district. Let's talk about it. What do you have?
Well, we had a chance to jump in the field over the weekend here, and we used primarily text messaging and email for this data collection. And within North Carolina's first district, up in the northeastern part of the state, as we kind of dig in there, it got redistricted between 2024 and 2026. So the new district that we're looking at for this primary shift from where the Democrats win by a couple of points. You see Don Davis beat Buckhout by about 2 points. Trump won the district by 3. The district shifts further to the right now by about 9 points, where it would be now a Trump plus 12 districts. So this has got the Republicans excited, thinking this could be a pickup opportunity, and that's what makes this primary so interesting. Obviously, it goes off in a couple of weeks.
So, what do you have on the survey? Because this is the big reveal. This is a big deal. This is puts the person kind of in the lead going into the primary here in a few weeks.
Well, in the survey results, we see Lori Buckhout doing well. She's leading, but the expectation was that she was doing really well. And we're not seeing that in this poll. She's statistically tied with Asa Buck, who got drawn into the district. So when they redistricted, his home got drawn into the new district and he decided to run. So it kind of shakes up the race here. And we can see that Buck is running very well with the Republicans, tied with Buckhout, but Buckhout is doing better with independents. So we'll see in this type of primary, it's a mixed primary where independents and Republicans can vote, and we'll see who comes out and supports their candidates.
Interesting. We've got 5 or 4 people above 5%, and we are going to do a debate here in about 10 days in North Carolina, February 19th. And 4 of these 5 candidates will be part of that debate. Um, Joining us is political reporter from our Raleigh station, CBS 17, Russ Bowen. Russ is joining us again. Russ, thanks for joining us.
Sure thing.
Hey, can you just give us a quick little thumbnail on each one of these candidates and why we should care about each one of them?
Yeah, so Lori Buckhout is a self-made multimillionaire, a businesswoman who is a retired colonel who served in the Middle East in combat. She's fairly well known mainly because of her campaign in that last election that you just mentioned. And she's primarily self-funded. And then you brought up Asa Buck. Asa Buck is a sheriff, not that well known outside of his own county, but he is certainly very used to talking in front of people, in front of the media. He knows exactly how to get out there and sell his point to try to beat Buck out, because it looks like those two are kind of almost neck and neck when you look at it. And then on the periphery, you've got Senator Hoenig, who is a state senator who's known within his district, but not so much well known throughout the whole district, because his state Senate district, of course, is much smaller than the congressional district, which is much bigger geographically and with additional counties than what he currently sits in. And then you've got businessman Eric Rouse, who's in this race too, who you saw on that list. But the way I'm looking at it, Buckhout and Buck are the closest, and you can't make that up, Buckhout and Buck there. And I'm kind of surprised at the undecided to being 36%, right? Because as you both know, all of you know, that when we get towards a general, that tightens to 5 or 6%, right? 36% even in primary is crazy for North Carolina. So if I'm any of these candidates, I think I've got a shot at least a recount, or at least a primary runoff, if it comes to that. Because 36%, I mean, whether these people show it to the polls, that's a whole nother question too. But there's room there if they get their boots on the ground as early voting is about to get underway in our state, to really make up some ground with these undecideds.
Spence, likely voters is who you polled, so we expect these guys to go to the polls. And to Russ's point, 36% is high, especially when you've got a Lori Buckout in the race who spent a lot of money in 24, not that long ago. You'd think she'd have a little bit better name recognition and people gravitating to her a little bit more.
Exactly to your point. That's why I'd be concerned if I'm on the Buckout campaign, because she should be at a higher number. I think Trump's non-endorsement in this race, again, opens up the door for any of these candidates to make the claim that they're the Trump candidate, and that's what they're doing. And we'll see which voters who they believe is the most Trumpian candidate of the four. But that undecided number is high, and I think that debate really speaks volumes of how important it is that they're going to tune in, and voters are going to make up their mind after that performance, and we expect to see that number drop considerably after they are all on stage.
Now, Russ, you're going to be part of that debate, but we did have a forum with these candidates just last week, and Lori Buckout made a point of not saying she was endorsed by Trump, but she used his name several times, touted that she was part of his administration up until just a month or so ago. What are you reading the tea leaves, and what are you seeing here for as far as her campaign, and are they concerned, and where's Asa Buck sitting now that with these numbers out, do you think?
Well, I think one thing I want to go back just a little bit to answer your question in terms of that undecided amount there. There's been really not a whole lot of voter engagement in this race up to now, right? There's been very little social media. There's been nothing on the air until very, very recently. Lori Buckout has had to reintroduce herself after 2 years on TV. No one else is really running any ads. They're running no ads in the western part so far of that district, which is where, at the very periphery of Raleigh in central North Carolina, but not in that district, but there are plenty of people who come into this area to work from that particular district. I think if you look at Lori Buckout's social media, you see lots of pictures of her with Donald Trump, lots of pictures of her through time endorsing the Trump administration's policies, showing that she's walking step in step with that administration, whether it's regarding DOGE, which she was a part of, whether it's regarding the economy, immigration, whatever it is. And that's, I think, what she's really worked hard at proving, but whether it's resonating with anybody is the bigger question. And then you asked about the sheriff. Again, his biggest challenge is going to be, okay, we learn in the forum that all of you are pretty much right there in the same camp with the president. But how do you separate yourself from each other? And how do you, can you be more specific in terms of, what are you going to actually do for this one particular district that's not a part of the big general question and picture of the United States?
And just one last comment on all these candidates. The one person that did stand out in our forum last week was Bobby Hoenig, Senator Hoenig, mainly because he had the biggest, brightest red bow tie that I've ever seen ever on a candidate. It was impressive to see. So it was memorable for sure. We'll see if he wears it next week. All right, moving on to the next slide. Spence, we've got what's the most important issue facing your community? So very hyper-local, hyper-specific question for D1 voters.
And it's important that this was an open-ended choice. And so we didn't give them, hey, the economy, affordable housing. We said, what's in your mind as the most important issue? And that's what we found out is the economy, economic factors. We can see crime is up there. Remember, this is of Republican primary voters. If you look at affordable housing, that's a big issue for the younger voters. If we see healthcare, that's an issue for the older voters. And that's where these candidates have to kind of figure out what their message is going to be as they try to drive home why voters should vote for them on Election Day.
Russ, what jumps out at you in these numbers?
Well, I'm surprised at healthcare being so low since it's such a part of the conversation. When you go out on the street, you talk to people in the grocery store, what's the future look like? Access to care is really difficult for much of District 1. It's incredibly rural. There are not that many hospitals, and you have to drive a long way. And especially if there's a trauma event, you have to be helicoptered to somewhere to get to any sort of care. So that really surprises me. I'm not surprised that affordability, cost of living, the economy, affordable housing is way up there, because that's a big conversation all over the state, but particularly in these rural counties like District 1, where industry has sort of ignored that part of the state for some time now. And you see it. You see people leaving these communities. You see the tax base decreasing to support local municipalities and counties because there's just nowhere to work. So I think also immigration kind of surprises me. It's down at 6% since you polled Republican voters and independents or unaffiliated who would vote in a Republican primary as you can in North Carolina, because that's such a big part of the conversation right now nationally. So that does surprise me. It's that low on the ranking.
And finally, Spence, with North Carolina, we've got some positions on tariffs on the Republican primary voters now. So what are they saying?
Well, this is an important, because here we are in a primary. Trump's got a 90% approval here. So that's why all these candidates are lining up with Trump. And one of his big issues is tariffs. So amongst Republican primary voters, they like the tariffs. They think they're beneficial. It's 80% to 12%. But remember last week we looked at Kentucky, and the tariffs was much more controversial. The Republicans liked it, like what we're seeing here, but it was the independents that were opposed to the tariffs 2-1, and the Democrats look more like the opposite of the Republicans, where they opposed them 80-12. So you get these primary issues that the Republicans can run on, but then you have to pivot to the general election and still win over these independent voters, and tariffs might be a tough issue for them come the general.
Well, the change in the district helps whoever wins this race trying to deal with independent voters. But Russ, any thoughts here as the final slide?
Well, I mean, I think that it's all about appealing to the unaffiliated. You can't win a state. You can't win any race in North Carolina, whether it's for county commissioner or whether it's for city council, statewide race, or a congressional race without those unaffiliated voters and without the independents. So they've got to go talk to them. And, as you know, it's a whole lot different talking to your base in a primary as opposed to talking to everybody for a general. It's a much easier thing to win over the base for your primary, but you've got to keep those unaffiliated folks with you as you fall into November. So I don't see them doing that just yet. So I'm interested to see if that happens or plays out a little bit more so in the next couple of weeks.
And while the district did change, Don Davis is still a formidable candidate on the Democratic side for whoever wins to run against.
And there will
An
be plenty of
incumbent.
money coming in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they want to protect that district for sure.
That's right.
Any final thoughts, Russ? Because we've got to move on. We got other big stories here.
No, I just think it's going to be fun to watch and interesting. We've got a couple of other primaries here that got more interesting the last couple of weeks. So, let's check in afterwards and see if it's status quo or if it's we've got some real races on our hands.
Political Power Ranker will be back in North Carolina. We can promise you that. So, Russ Bowen, CBS 17 in Raleigh, thank you very much for joining us. All right. Coming up next, we have Minnesota numbers. Yes, where all the controversy has been happening. We've got someone here who's on the ground, who's seen a lot of it happen firsthand. We'll be right back with more Political Power Ranker talking Minnesota and all Minnesota for the next 20 minutes. All right, we are back with Political Power Ranker, but we are switching gears. We're going to Minnesota. Joining us to talk about Minnesota is Bob McNaney. Bob McNaney from the McNaney Group. Bob and I spent many years together in Minnesota when we were both in news in the Twin Cities area. Bob was a reporter for KSTP for about 17 years, 20 plus years in the industry. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Man, I'm very curious to hear what you're going to say about all these numbers that Spence going to throw at us. So, Spence, let's start with Minnesota and what you found up there.
Well, we had a chance to poll Minnesota as well this weekend. And in Minnesota, we used texting in an online panel. We used 1,000 likely voters for their August primary. And we have a margin of error of ±3 here.
Excellent. All right. Let's get right to the most important thing. It's facing Minnesotans. Bingo. What's that show?
Well, this is a lot different than what we've seen around the country. So we ask generally a standard set of questions on what's your most important issue, like we did in NC1, but we also included that open-ended. But in Minnesota, what we're seeing is threats to democracy is the top issue. And it's the first time in our polling we've seen this pop as the top issue in any state. The economy is down to 16%. Usually that's around 30 to 40%. Immigration hovers at 17%. And then another interesting part of this poll is we use that something else category. And generally we get 2-3% of ideas. Not in this poll. We got over 10% listed ICE, and then another 3-4% put in fraud. So we can see that there are a lot of issues floating out in Minnesota that may not be what's top of mind to voters in other states.
Before I ask Bob a question here, having someone physically write in a poll, ICE, I mean, that doesn't happen 8 to 10% in your polls. That takes effort.
Oh, exactly. That's why it raised an eyebrow for us, and we're reporting it out to all of you, that it's a different set of issues in Minnesota, and we're going to see how the politicians are able to address them for the voters. And it's great to have Bob there because he's on the ground and can give us much more clarity on what these numbers represent.
Bob, I mean, first, just from a everyman's perspective, we go way back. You're just a guy who's hanging out. Our kids were the same age. That grew up in a relatively normal place, but it doesn't seem quite as normal as I left it 20 years ago.
No, it's chaos. It just is. I travel the country, I travel the world with clients, and there's not a stop that I make where people say, is it really as screwed up as it seems? And my answer is yes. The stuff that's happening in this community, the Twin Cities in particular, is bizarre. I was in a Target store a couple of Saturdays ago in a very nice neighborhood, and you walk in the door, there's 25 people just standing there protesting ICE, and Target lets them stay there. The security people let them stay there. The police let them stay there. Every street corner on weekends, you have someone holding the sign pro ICE or negative ICE. Virtually every overpass on the interstates. It is the most bizarre thing to see, Chris, in many respects. And it certainly says that it is on the minds of Minnesotans. I mean, there are two big issues in this state, and it is obviously cost the governor. He is not going to run again. We'll talk more about that. But the two big issues, it's ICE. It is ICE. It is ICE, and it is crime with the ICE. The problem with the ICE situation is you can't even go into parts of Minneapolis because you're going to get caught in a protest. You're going to get caught into a riot of some sort. There was a tragic shooting 2 weeks ago, and in the second case, the Minneapolis Police Department wasn't even able to process the crime scene fully because the crowds were so unruly and so big. So even if you're out running around on a Saturday, you may just bump into some trouble, and it's a different place. And the other thing that is fascinating here is the fraud that people talk about. That is a number that is climbing. The television coverage has obviously brings the protests to light, but the fraud is something that when I talk to far left liberals and far right conservatives, they equally agree. Somebody or somehow they've been asleep at the wheel. One colleague that I speak with on a regular basis said, I'm a spending and tax liberal from the day I was born until the day I die, but I cannot keep people in office who are going to allow this to happen. I have conservative associates who are now trying to figure out how not to pay taxes because they feel like they're just being complicit. So it really is about as bizarre as you might imagine.
Coming from a place that may be the most normal place you can imagine 20 years ago. I mean, so normal we were all boring, and that's which blows my mind how different it is. And what's also fascinating, and you can just kind of put a bow on it, this time of year, second week of January to second week of February, is the coldest time of year in Minnesota. Bone chilling, below zero cold. And I'm shocked at all the people that are out protesting because that's not easy.
No, it's not. I mean, when you and I worked together and you'd keep me out there on the street doing a live shot in February, you weren't my favorite person because it was 20 below. It's crazy. People are out there bundled up and they're standing there with signs on both sides of this and they're protesting. You talk about hardcore. We used to joke sometimes that bad weather knocks down protests, but in this case, these people are absolutely bought in.
Shocked. All right, we got a lot of numbers to get through. So Spence, let's go next to the fave unfave. What's a couple names that are interesting? At least one that you threw on there just for a test? Go ahead.
Well, we have Senator Klobuchar on the list. She tops the list. She's very popular in the state. She's running for governor to fill Walz's seat. And then we have two Democrats, Flanagan and Craig. They're the women running for the Democratic nomination for the open seat for Tina Smith. And then as we go down the list, you can see like we have Jesse Ventura, who the body could maybe be the left's version of Hulk Hogan. He's kind of split out there. And then Mike Lindell, not so popular. So while things might be a little wild out in Minnesota, they're not that wild that Mike Lindell is turning the needle. But you can see that, especially Michelle Tafoya, who's the new Republican candidate on the Republican side, she's got some name rec. Even though she's been a broadcaster, people know of her name. They don't really know her that well, and I expect to see her kind of put out a lot more introductory pieces, bio pieces to introduce her to voters over the next 8 months.
Bob, you want to address the Michelle Tafoya dynamic? We talked a little bit about it. This is interesting.
Yes, it's fascinating to me. It's hard to believe you could be in television for 20 plus years, both here in the Twin Cities and nationally, and not have people have a strong view of you. That's basically neutral at 50-something% or 50%. And people who lived and died in the world of TV numbers, you either get loved or hated when you're on television for that long. And somehow, some way, she's remained neutral. And so you can view it as a negative because they don't know who she is, or a positive because she has a fresh slate in which she can introduce herself. And she's taking that. You know, she's lived here for many years, originally from California. She's raised her family here. And, you know, she shot her first campaign promo walking on a high school football field, talking about walking the sidelines, and now she's in the game. So, you know, it's a curious candidacy. But the reality is, you know, you talk to the real numbers people in Minnesota, it's tough. It's going to be tough. One person said with Klobuchar, she's so neutral and so embedded, and Minnesotans love Minnesotans, that it would be, whoever goes up against her would be like the Harlem Globetrotters playing the Washington Generals for basketball fans. So it's really tough to beat a hometown Democrat whose father was a columnist for years. But if there's someone out there, you know, Tafoya could be the wild card because there is that runway for her.
Our buddy Tom Hauser did her very first Senate debate when we were together back in the early 2000s. And I mean, she was like watching paint dry then. I mean, she's a very nice lady, a very likable person, but being a dynamic person is not part of her personality.
Not at all. And I think that's part of it. You know, one of the things that we're seeing, you know, you talk to folks here, is Minnesota is different. It's rural and it's very Republican. Core city is very Democrat. And what they're fighting for basically is the suburban moms. That's what they're up for. And which mom are they going to pick? Is it going to, you know, who's it going to be? But that's really where the Republicans are struggling to gain. They might be able to overcome some of the stuff that's going on in the city, and maybe turn purple or maybe turn a little red, but those suburban votes are tough. And the other variable that I'll just add is Minnesota has this, call it what you will, law that allows for vouching for up to 8 people. So, you know, election integrity is something that's talked about a lot in this state. So you basically show up at a polling place and you can vouch for 8 people without showing ID. And that's complicated.
That's interesting. I didn't realize Minnesota had that law. All right, Spence, we're running really tight on time, so let's go through a few more slides you've got here fairly quickly, starting with Trump and Walz.
Yeah, so both are underwater. Not really a surprise for President Trump in a state that he loses by 4 or 5 points. His popularity nationally is down, and you see that here in these numbers. He's down with independents as well, about a lot. What is he at? 29 to 62. Walz, though, is underwater. Here's a state, it's a Democratic state. Walz should be doing better. He's also underwater with those independents, 38 to 43. So both leaders, particularly Walz, who's the governor, he's struggling right now, and it's probably the lowest he's been since he's been in office.
All right, let's go to the Tafoya and Flanagan Craig races.
So yeah, we did the general election matchups here in the potential hypothetical Senate races. You can see Flanagan's got 6-point lead. Craig's got a 7-point lead. And in polling, you're up 6-7. It's pretty good. And that's what they're at. So, and the reason why 6-7 is pretty good, it's not because of the slang, it's because there's a margin of error of 3%. So you double that margin, you get to 6. And if you're over that, you're potentially going to win. The good news for Tafoya is neither Democrat is at 50%. They're at 47. So it looks like the Dems have the advantage coming out of the gate, but we'll see if Tafoya, again, with her name recognition, is able to introduce herself to voters and then win over that swing vote. But she definitely starts behind the two Democrats.
And then last graphic, we're jumping over to ICE and general view, and this is just interesting.
It sure is, because you got all of this going on in Minnesota. And so the idea is that ICE would be very disliked. And they're disliked, but they don't want to get rid of ICE. So we can see that the Democrats want to get rid of ICE, the Republicans don't. And this is the problem that these both sides are going to have. The independents are split. They want to keep ICE for the meantime. So the idea of defunding might be popular, eliminating probably not so popular for the left. And we're going to see where the right comes in on ICE. But that's what makes this issue so interesting, is those independents.
We are running late, and I'm just going to say really quickly, you had Amy Klobuchar up, Tim Walz down, and I want to give Bob one last quick 15 seconds, wrap up in Minnesota, conclude this thought here. What would you want to leave people with?
It is a very, very dynamic state right now. 10,000 lakes, a few controversies, and a lot of votes to count.
Awesome. Bob McNaney, thank you very much for joining us. North Carolina and Minnesota, a very fast episode, everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We will see you next week when we'll have more results and more interesting outcomes. Thank you very much.